Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Family Biz Show. I am Michael Columbus with Family Wealth and Legacy in Rochester, New York, and we've got a great show for you today. We're talking with members of the Sessler Companies, and the title of the show happens to be that company's core purpose, which is making great things happen. I almost did, right? Making great things happen. And so I'm super pleased to have Jane Shaffer and Brian Sessler with us here today. Jane is the president of Sessler Excavating and Wrecking, and Brian is the president of Sessler Environmental Services. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
You got it. So the way we typically start the show off is just ask everybody to kind of give a little bit of a journey of how did you end up working in the family business? And everybody's journey seems to be a little bit different. We have those that, dive right in feet first. And we have others that take the long road like myself when I got part of, working with my father. So Jane, why don't you kick us off and tell us about your journey?
Well, actually, you're born right into the family and the family business. And I was constantly at my mother's knee learning different office techniques and processes, and was her assistant from a very young age. I didn't know that checking all of those red marked checks on the statement was really reconciling a bank statement. I thought it was a fun rainy day activity she just had me doing to keep busy. So there were all kinds of tasks that all of us kids did growing up with our parents. And even on through high school, I had learned how to read the time clock at the metal fab and how to do payroll, and learned typing and shorthanded from my mother, and continued right through school through the different entities that our company and our family had. Went off to college, came back, went to Seneca Army Depot, worked in the admin building, and then worked for the engineering department, which further enforced my background in the construction business and working closely with the Corps of Engineers. Then I was married and moved to Syracuse and went to work for the IRS and learned all of their little interesting facts and tidbits that also helped me in the later years. Moved back to Waterloo and continued working with the company. Our father had multitude of health issues, and my mother's time was taken away from the office quite a bit. We were basically a one-person office located in our home. So they had asked me if I could come on full time, which I did, and I've been here ever since. It's been 42 years now. So yes, grew up with the family and pitched in and helped wherever I could, and then moved in full time.
Congrats. Cool. Thank you for sharing. Brian, how about yourself?
Well, kind of like Aunt Jane just told everybody, being born into a family business means about the first time you can walk, you're off, you're doing something for the family business, whether you know it or not. Naturally, in the industries that we're in, big toys, big excavators, big sandboxes. Anytime as I was growing up, I had the chance to go to work with dad or grandpa or whatever I could do to just be involved. That's how I kind of got introduced to the family business, go out and see the job sites and everything else. And so I personally grew there's a fascination, for the type of work that we did. And it was just really interesting. And as I went through high school, you try to spend the weekends up at the shop and get to know all the equipment and everything else. And then fast forward to after graduation, I did go to college for a little bit, and then I came back to the family business starting in 2002, and I've been working ever since.
Awesome. Walk us through, if you wouldn't mind, kind of set the landscape of the family members in the business. So the company was started by Brian B., your grandparents, right?
Yep.
So give me a little bit of, how that worked out. Jane, do you want to walk us through that? Your parents
Sure.
started it when?
Our parents, Vern and Barb Sessler, started the Sessler Companies in 1958, and they started it with a 1952 Ford 9N tractor backhoe, which our father promptly painted pink. Some said it was the cheapest darn paint he could get. Others said it was a marketing whiz. And was pink for a couple years, and then we went to our traditional colors of blue and yellow. So it was started by our parents 1958, 64 years ago. And it was doing basements and septic lines and different small projects. And then through the 60s, he started into a little bit larger, and we kept growing and adding employees and finding our niche in the bridge demolition, which we've now expanded quite a bit.
Great. And then, so your parents passed the business on to whom? Who was the next generation?
So the first generation obviously was Vern and Barb Sessler, and the second generation is myself and my two brothers, Craig Sessler and Laverne Sessler Jr.
Gotcha.
As I'd mentioned earlier, our father had a lot of different health ailments, but so did our mother. And our mother passed away at the very young age of 59. And when she passed away is when the succession and the transfer of the companies went to generation 2. So it was in 1997 that Craig, Vern, and I became the next active generational owners of the company. And our father also died at a young age at 66, and he was still very active, or as active as he could be at those times. Matter of fact, during those times is when he, as a true entrepreneur, was starting a lot of other little businesses. We had Sessler's Happy Days, which was a soda fountain. We had Sessler's Best 18 miniature golf course in Florida. We just had a multitude of different things. We had Vern's hot dog stands throughout New York State. So even though he was, quote unquote, retired from the demolition business, his entrepreneurial spirit still lived on, and that spirit lives on within each one of the family members. As we were coming through the ages, besides Craig, Vern, and I, as Brian said, all the boys with G3, except for my daughter, is all boys. So we have a lot of Sessler boys funneling up through the companies. So we have through the transitions, we've had Craig's 4 boys, Dan, Brian, Jeff, and Kevin, and we've had Laverne's family, Laverne and Nick, who have come through the business. And as we all know, when you bring that many family members together, sometimes it gets too crowded or it squashes others' entrepreneurial spirits. And it is quite common in a lot of family businesses. Some need to find their own way and have. And the oldest, Daniel Sessler, has captured that entrepreneurial spirit of his grandfather, and he has branched off to start his own company, and he is doing very well. And so we still have 5 of G3, is what we call the 3rd generation in the company. And, they range in age from the mid-20s to the late 30s. So we have quite a ladder of succession that's coming into place.
Sure. Thank you. Brian, walk me through, you started in 2002, you said.
Yep.
And, you joined the family business. What was it like for you then? versus, and your siblings versus what's going on today. Walk us through, and what do the conversations, maybe there was, some through the years, there was probably some different conversations that happened between you and G2.
Yeah. So when I started, it was, which I applaud. I give G2 a lot of credit, because when I tell you there was no silver spoon, I mean, there was really no silver spoon. We started at the shop, sweeping the shop floor. You were the low man on the totem pole on the job sites, working out in the field, and we essentially had to earn our way right up through the business, from being the labor on the job site to then the foreman to an operator to the superintendent. There's a lot of different levels, that we had to climb up through. So for the first, I'm going to say for the first 12 to 15 years of my career at the Sessler Companies, was involved a lot at the mostly in the demolition company. Again, starting from the labor to growing all the way up to heading in 2015, 2016, myself, and at the time my brother Dan was involved, and we were the heads of operation for the entire Sessler wrecking company.
And that's about the time that, I had met the family through my father years before. I remember being in the blue building upstairs one time for a meeting with the three of you, maybe in probably about the time you started, Brian. I think my dad was kind of taking me around because he was excited that Michael had joined the business. And then, but it was 2015, 16, as Dad was getting ready to retire, that we started, interacting together.
So Michael, when we're talking about that time frame, that's when we started thinking of transition succession planning. So much kudos to your father and to our parents. They were proponents of planning.
Yeah.
And our parents had engaged, your father, Marty, and worked with him on structuring their estates. Even though their estates were small, they were structuring their estates and how should things look and how do we move forward? How do we keep what they started as the Sessler legacy moving forward? So in 2012 is when Craig Vernon and I were firming up succession plannings and looking at what's the direction we want this family and the companies to go. And at that time, I was appointed officially as president of Sessler Wrecking, and we became established as one of the premier woman business enterprises in the demolition field, not only New York, but throughout the Northeast. And Craig and Vern and I further grew the company and bringing in the multiple talents that each of G3 had. And part of that planning was working with a variety of consultants to make sure that G3 had the skill sets and the training and the preparation necessary. And part of that 10-year plan that we were working on was how to further diversify the assets of the company. What is the best transfer mechanisms? And at that time is when we started 2 more additional companies. One was Sessler Equipment, which became the entity of which we purchased all the construction equipment in. But what we did was we started the Sessler Equipment in G3's name. So all the assets were beginning to evolve into G3 transitional. And then through that, trying to look at what other aspects and avenues were available that we regularly were already in environmental was the area that we chose. So shortly after the establishment of Sessler Equipment, we established in Generation 3, the Sessler Environmental Services, which after much discussion it was that Brian would head up that division and become the president of that company. So by the so right around 2015, 2016,
Exactly.
we had already developed 2 G3 owned companies that are vital parts to the Sessler Companies. So the Sessler equipment would purchase the equipment and then lease it to both Sessler Wrecking and to Sessler Environmental. And that's when the force and the gravity of G3 and bringing everybody in and getting everybody on the same roadmap for succession.
So can I there was a conversation I remember in 2015 sitting around the conference room, and see if anybody else remembers this conversation, and you had, Sessler Excavating and Wrecking was there. Equipment was there at the time. I think SES started in 16.
2016 we incorporated, and I believe the equipment company was 2014.
Right. So the equipment was before I started, talking with you. And the conversation I remember, and feel free to say, Michael, you're making that up. But the conversation I remember is, SEW had kind of, I don't want to say plateaued, but you guys had, you were taking everything you needed out of it. And it had done a really good job of, caring for and providing lifestyle for the 3 G2 families as they were. And somebody said, and it might have been you, Jane, so tell me if I'm remembering this right, is what fed 3 families can't feed, 5, yet alone all 8 of us. So how are we going to, we've got to do something differently. Do you remember that conversation?
I do. And that was a mimic of a conversation that my father's brother, Bob Sessler, had said to me back in the early 80s before I joined the family business, saying, the company, your father isn't doing well. I don't know if it can support another family. Don't leave your government job. Wow, as true as the Sessler spirit and how stubborn we can all be, we said, well, the heck with that, and joined the Sessler family and grew it from supporting just one family to then Craig, Vernon, I to 4 families, to then to generation to 8 families. But we knew that through the structure changes that wrecking alone could not do that in the way that it was currently set up. And that's why we had to look at the other support avenues of companies, not only to support wrecking, but also within wrecking, we further diversified those and took on a much stronger role, not only in the bridge demolition, but in establishing the building and the large commercial demolition, so that we have 2 very distinct divisions with leadership groups, which, now we're supporting between all the companies. And this is where I get goosebumps. Between all the employees of our companies, we are currently supporting over 120 families.
That's awesome.
Sometimes, with the seasonal help, we can be up to 200 families. And every morning that I get up, I'm cognizant of that. It's not just, is the Sessler family okay? It's, are the employees okay? Where are we? We have to make sure that the whole team, it's not just the Sessler family, it's the Sessler team across to all companies. And then we have to make sure we treat the employees well, and that we are treating that we're treating them well and they feel appreciated, so that we can all work together for each other's benefit.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, matter of fact, I'll come back to that in a second. I don't know if either one of you knows the company values by heart, but I know that, when you do, I just saw it recently on a LinkedIn ad where you're hiring, and, you posted, here's our company, our company values. And I know that those values are alive and well in the company. Just when I meet the employees, I don't have to meet a family member. you can see it alive and well in the employees that you work with today. Brian, I want to talk about the business itself, and I want to talk about, Jane, talked about the fact that there was a time when it was digging out basements and pools and, small jobs. And when you got involved in the company, what were some of the big jobs that were happening for you, at the time? And then what were some of the things that, as you were going through the years, say up and, before SES started, what were some of the things and how did you grow and how did you, add to your capabilities through that period of time?
Yeah. I would have to say when I first started, the company was more local. The first probably 5 years or so of myself entering the business, we were more of a local company. We hit we had that 100-mile radius around us type of mentality, and every now and then we'd go a little bit further. But as time went on, I noticed and looking, I didn't realize it at the time, but as I sit and I reflect back, I could see the growth of the company. And then all of a sudden, hey, we're over here in Massachusetts, and hey, we're up here in Vermont now, and hey, then we kind of conquered, in a good way, we conquered the New York City market. I can kind of remember, the first couple jobs back in 2001. I can remember some of those, the jobs going on down there, and then we caught some big contracts down in the southern tier. So I've enjoyed, the course of my career has enjoyed the watching the company grow and truthfully not even realizing what we were doing. In my head at the time, it was like, hey, I got a job over here. I got to go do this job. And lo and behold, it's a roadmap to where we expanded to now we cover basically the entire Northeast.
If you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to get a little specific because there's a couple of things through the history that I think are important for you guys to share. One was, in the demolition of bridges, if I'm not mistaken, there was a patent along the way that, some innovations that came from them. And then, when we talked, about strategy back in 2015, before things really started to get rolling the way they are. And let me give you kudos real quick. In the US, the amount of companies that do annual revenues of $1 million or less is about 93% of businesses. The number of companies that do revenues between $1 and $10 million is about 6%. Okay. To do over $10 million of revenue is less than 1%. And to do, more than $100 million is like 1/4%. And you guys, have a lot to be proud of in order to feed, and house, over 100 different families. We know that the revenues, are well north of, the $10 million range. So I'm not talking out of school or anything, but, to get there, that's not where you started when the three of you, Jane, Craig, and Vern, took over the company. You were below that $10 million mark, and you had surpassed some things, but there was creativity and innovation. And the thing that I remember the thing that I think is something to be really proud of is, you always said, give us the most technically difficult jobs and this family will figure out how to get it done. So, talk about, a couple of the jobs, Brian, where you sit there and say, technically, these were some of the toughest things that we did.
Yeah. Some of the, so as we mentioned earlier, bridge demolition was a niche for us. And we've got the reputation of being the premier bridge demolition contractor, especially, east of the Mississippi. So some of the technical jobs that we would get into are large drawbridges that have massive, 1,000,000-pound counterweights and, a lot of building and bridge implosions that, you're dropping bridges into the bottom of a lake, and you got to use scuba divers to go down and retrieve them off the bottom of the lake. And then New Jersey Turnpike, where they decide, hey, we want to widen the entire thing and rip out, 25 bridges. And here we go. We're going to rip out 25 bridges on the New Jersey Turnpike to
All at the same time.
all at
One
the
after
same time.
another.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and then we did some jobs that involved a lot of underwater concrete removal. So we had to utilize GPS typed equipment because obviously you can't see underwater, and we had to reach to the depths of 40 foot below sea level to reach the concrete. Massive amounts of concrete to come out, and naturally the bridge demolition. There's inherent engineering techniques that you got to use, and we pride ourselves with the level of engineering that we have in-house and the consultants that we use. It's the team that really helps us tackle these technical projects.
Great.
So along with that, you had talked about the patents. So back in the early around 1990, 92, our brothers, Craig and Vern, had developed 3 different patents. And these patents are still in effect. They have worked wonderful for the company between our wing attachments to our trailers, to the barge projects that we do, that really helped to catapult the bridge industry where we work. So Craig and Vern just had that spirit. They weren't engineers and they weren't trained engineers, but from the work experience and looking to see what needed to be done and how we could streamline, had taken their ideas and further developed them, had them proved out, and obtained these very important patents for the Sessler Company.
Yep.
Great. So I want to, the wing trailers, you got a trailer, the wings pop out underneath the bridge so that when the bridge falls down, it captures all of the, the debris, right? And when you see it and you think about it, it's like, well, of course that makes perfectly good sense. But somebody had to be going through there and, they dropped that bridge and you're sending people left and right to pick everything up, or equipment left and right. And, one device, really made a huge, giant difference for the work that you did. So kudos to your ingenuity and, how you looked at things. And that continues today. I know, in conversations that we've had, both with G2 and G3, one of the things that they have said is that innovation and that ability to look at those difficult jobs. There's not a job that the Sessler family, when it comes to demolition and environmental, work, that you'd probably shy away from at this point. I remember, watching videos of the implosion of some of the Eastman Kodak buildings, which just amazing when you watch the timing behind there. I know a couple of years ago, you even left we're typically on the East Coast. You went to the Midwest. Tell us about, what was that project like?
So out in Michigan, I assume that's the project you're talking about. We were hired to decommission an old General Motors, I believe it was General Motors, power plant. Obviously, the car manufacturer, they had their own power plants out there, and it was a large boiler house. I think it contained 7 different boilers on the inside, and so we were hired. Sesslers were hired to go there to decommission the entire plant, the entire facility, which was, we took on all of the environmental components, from the asbestos to the PCBs to the universal waste. And then we commenced the demolition, and that demolition also included a 110 foot tall boiler house that we didn't have to, but we imploded to bring it down because that was the safest way to do it.
Awesome. That's it's fun stuff. As a kid, I remember having my sandbox, Brian, that, my father Marty built this giant sandbox for us, and I had the big old Tonka trucks. And so every time I pull into, the pull in the driveway or the parking lot and see those giant excavators and whatnot, it's you understand. It's sometimes it probably doesn't feel like going to work when you get the chance to to be thinking about how are we going to do these things.
Well,
Yeah.
well, Brian. So you talked about all of the, I call it the boys' toys, right? So whenever we would purchase the new excavator, one of my nephews would always claim it. Is that mine? Is that my new birthday present? Can I operate it first? So it was like, oh no, and all the excitement about the real life. And all of the Sessler boys have all torn down their first house at a very young age, right? It's like, oh, yeah, let's go down to the old PNC or the Save-A-Lot, and, whose turn is it now to get in the excavator? Of course, supervise, make sure everything is safe and in compliance. But those were like the, I don't know, the training wheels, for everybody. And we're talking with Brian and myself, we have to make sure that we're talking about the other people in G3 and the impact that they have on the company, right, Brian? So
Absolutely.
if you don't mind, you want me to wait?
Yeah, because I'm going to come to that in a second, because there's a lot of I think there's a few other pieces I just want to set up real quick.
Okay. My light went out.
Brian, to talk about wow, what was it? I forgot what I was going to say. That's all right. Let's do this. Let's just back up to that 2015 when I was introduced to the family at a different level. If you don't, so at the time you've got Sessler Excavating and Wrecking and Sessler Equipment. Paint the picture of what's going on at that point. You're, 3 years into the transition plan that was put together by my father and your accountant and attorney at the time. And that's really key. You guys have always been really good at making sure that you put all of the advisors together so that they could beat out and talk to each other, and the pros and cons of each of the different scenarios could be worked through by putting the team together. And that's really smart, because one of the things that we've learned through the years, and I learned from my father, is that if I press on one button, it's like a lever, something else happens. And so you need to know what all of those different things are, and you don't know the tax aspects if it's if you're just approaching it from a legal perspective, or what the financial perspective is, or the estate plan perspective, and all of those things are come from when you have the level of success that the family's had. You have to be careful of all those different pieces. So Brian, do you want to
But to go along with that, Michael, is we always found great time value and fiscal value in bringing all of the components together to the same table, right? Like, let's talk out the taxes and the legal and the succession and the estate, and let's get all the players together, schedule it. We're all in the same conference room, and let them all feed off each other, right? Instead of having the meeting with the attorney who's now going to call the accountant, and a week later we might get that response, which further impacted the estate. We need to bring in that person. So Craigburn and I would talk about, we'd bring everybody in, and all of a sudden the conversation would migrate, between all of those advisors, and we would just sit back and watch it happen, and then come back together like, okay, this is what everybody's marching orders are. And it saved a lot of time and energy, because everybody was at the same moment in the same conversation, not diluted by a week or a month. So
Yeah.
we are strong proponents of that. Bring everybody together. Don't worry about the cost of the hourly for this one or that one. Bring them all together and get the interaction going.
It all, at the end of the day, and I have been a big proponent of that myself, as you know, but at the end of the day, it saves time and money. And one of the things that I've learned, and I think you've seen this, is that it's not comfortable for every single one of the advisors. A lot of times, especially when you get really good advisors, there's this, this ego thing that happens, and I'm supposed to be leading, or where things are. And what I've learned is everybody just needs to set the egos aside and just serve. And when that happens, the magic happens, because an idea sprouts out of, like you said, Jane, the accountant says something, or the attorney, or the wealth advisor, says something different, the business coach, and it's like, oh, we missed that. So like, one of the things that I think was fabulous is, when you started the equipment company, you didn't start it in the name of G2, and so the ownership was already so here's a company that was, non-existent, no assets, did no value at that point. And then you started that, building the value in the next generation. And that's, generational allocation of the assets. So, all right. So we're going to paint the picture, Brian, from your perspective. Think about around that 2015 timeframe. From G3's perspective, what's happening?
Yeah. So in 2015, not all of the members that are present in the business now were active at that time. I don't know exactly which ones were, but I know I do believe my brother Dan was involved. I was obviously involved. My brother Jeff was involved, and I'm not sure if Kevin was involved at that point or not. So at this stage in our career here, we're coming out of the field, and we're kind of entering, flirting with the idea, I'll say, of entering into the office and management side of things. All the while, we started with the transition. The business, the wrecking business was, it was doing pretty good at the time, I believe. And Jane might be able to correct me, but I know we did have a couple struggling years, because, and a lot of it I think was due to, there's just a lot of mouths to feed, and everyone is literally just trying to find their place in the business, because it was confusing a lot for G3. It's like, well, what are we supposed to be doing? We're not really sure. Should we have a shovel in our hand, or should we be over here, with a computer and trying to figure out the next job? We're not really sure. Trying to learn our place is the best way I can explain that. So at the time we had the equipment company, and then the talks, and you might have been involved in a lot of the talks about how do we transition the company from G2 to how do we essentially grow the family business. What are we going to do? Because as we touched on earlier, we're multiplying. There's going to be a lot more family members that we've got to feed. And almost as equally as important, we're all entrepreneurials, and we need that, we want to kind of drive something ourselves and develop something ourselves. And for a long time, the family's talked about the environmental arena, how it coincides with the demolition and everything else, and it could utilize a lot of the same equipment. And we talked about a lot of different avenues, and that was the one that kind of stuck in. At the time, we went to market, and we found a couple of experts that really assisted us in starting up that business, and the environmental business, and got it going. And it was a rough couple of years in the beginning, but it's really flourished since then. Pretty proud of it.
Yes. I'm going to come back. I've got some other questions for you, but Jane, from your perspective, 2015, what's G2 thinking?
In 2012, when we embarked on this 10-year, Craig Vern and I are still young, right? We're still young today. And we're looking like, oh, wouldn't it be great to be able to sit back and retire and be out of here in 10 years because we're the day-to-day grunting it out, right? And then as we get going, it's like G3 is coming in, and I'm not telling tales out of school, but it's like all of a sudden they start to feel entitlement, right? And it's like, what do you mean you think you're entitled to this or entitled to that? So that was a push between G2 and G3, right? And each one was trying to find their foothold, right? G2 is like, we're still here and you still need to do this, right? So working with yourself and other consultants was for each side to see what the other side was seeing and feeling and experiencing to help work through that. And that's where the art of communication is very important, so that G2 and G3 are understanding and that we can get into each other's heads. Even though I don't want to get into some of their heads, because those guys are thinking, I don't want to know. But so it was a tough, the last 5 years have been very transitional for the companies and for the family, as we began to better respect the younger ones, the G3, and to see that, wow, look at what they've learned and what they're doing, and their ideas have merit and they're successful. So it was like trying to learn how to loosen the grip as you're doing the pass off, right? But still keeping a hold of the tail to make sure it's still steering in the right direction, right? So when you have that much testosterone within a family business, and it gets difficult, right?
Poor
But
Jane.
they've all worked together and are learning how to do that. And as we mentioned, with all these young men and learning the skills, they're each finding their own nook of expertise or what they would like to do, right?
Yeah.
Which is great. Everybody's falling into. We have a good road plan, a roadmap going through. We're coming to the end of our 10-year succession. And even though the last 3 years have been rough, because we're like, holy crap, we're getting close. Where are we? Who's going to do what? So it's all the strategic planning on both sides and the open communication.
Yeah. And so one of the things, do you mind talking about, between 2015 and 16, there was some Saturday meetings and that I happened to be a part of with the family. Do you remember those meetings, Brian?
I do.
Do you want to just talk about that a little bit? Because I think that along with, and if you don't mind me, using his name, the other consultant that came in, is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah. So Jeff Savlov came in, and Jeff really, there was, and it came from the Saturday meetings at some level. So talk about the Saturday meetings that we were doing.
Yeah, I think we touched on it earlier a little bit. We're all trying to find our place, and it's specifically G3 is trying to find a place in the business, and at the same time, I think G2 is saying, what are you guys doing? You should be doing something different, or or what are you doing? It was a tough time, and then at the same time, we as the G3, as we started to elevate within the businesses and take on leadership roles, I think some members felt that they were being left behind. They weren't quite. It wasn't the dream that they once had. They weren't going to be in charge of everything, and the partnership that a family business needs, in my opinion, at least, the partnership. I'm not so sure that partnership was there. So those Saturday meetings with yourself and Jeff was trying.
So I apologize. When we first started the Saturdays, Jeff wasn't involved. If you remember, we pulled out a book, and it was like a book club meeting where we pulled out, Vern Harnish's book, Scaling Up.
Scaling Up, yeah.
And started to say, what are other companies doing to get through this stuff. And that's
Okay.
where, you know,
I apologize. I was
No,
thinking of the
that's
other
okay.
Saturday meetings. So the scaling up that we started doing, that really, in my opinion, that was at my point in time, that was when things just started clicking for me. That was me I'm speaking specifically for me. But I think it affected everybody. But at that point in time, it opened our eyes like, hey, we've got to be working on this business, not just in the business. We've got to do it together. And it kind of, at that point in time, I believe is when the throttles went back forward, and the entire family was, working together. We knew where we were going. We knew what we wanted to do, and we were figuring out pretty quickly how we were going to get there.
Yeah. And that, as those things started to unfold the way going back, as those things started to unfold, that's when some of the, I don't want to say it wasn't personalities, but it was like, wait a minute, we're growing and we're going into this stuff. And is this the direction I want to go? And that's when some of the communication was breaking down. And, it was like, I could walk you through reading this book, and I had been familiar with Rockefeller habits and scaling up, for over 10 years. So so I knew, enough, but I was not certified as a business coach in those areas at the time. And there was, just some of the personality pieces and, what the desires of, I didn't know how to navigate that. And I know I threw my hands up in the air at one point and was like, we got to get some help. And, and I remember there was a lot of pushback and tell me, if I'm from family to say, you want to bring in a family business coach? I don't, we don't need that. We just need to grow the business. Yeah. And there was Jeff Savlov. I had watched him at a Purposeful Planning Institute seminar. And he did this whole thing on Metallica and family businesses. And I remember coming back to you guys and saying, well, if you're cooler than Metallica, then I guess you don't need Jeff Savlov. Yeah. And that, I think, was the point that it was like, all right, if Metallica hired a business coach to help them, and it was a family business coach that, that helped Metallica stay together. And two, Metallica's credit, not that this is about Metallica, but they said, if it wasn't for that person, they would have gone the way of the Beatles. They would not have made it through those things. And, and if we look at where the family is today, everybody's in a spot where they're 1,000% happier doing what they're, what they were meant to do. And, if we look at, Brian, like you were saying, it was you and your three brothers originally. And now, since then, so SES, Sessler Environmental Services has grown, and all by itself has grown above that catapulted mark. I don't want to, it's well past $1 million, surpassed the $10 million mark. And it's put itself, made its own mark and, done something that, very few companies do in the US. And you've done it twice. You had, two different companies that have done that. Talk about, Jane, from your perspective, bringing in Vern's boys. What was that like? And they brought a different dynamic to the company.
They did. Both of Vern's boys are engineers. So they went to Penn State and Syracuse University, obtained their engineering degrees, and Laverne has his MBA and his engineering. So they brought a different strength to the team for us. And Laverne was working in the New York City area as project management. So he is the last Sessler family to join the company, but he brought with him a wealth of experience and ideas from the same field. Nick brought a lot of good engineering ideas and a lot of let's go get them enthusiasm, which was very good. And what I say about those Saturday meetings is we're bringing everybody is that kudos to the family because we all showed up. As painful as that would get, as the Band-Aids were ripped off, we were all there and we were frank, open, and honest to move the company and the family forward. And you'd leave that meeting and 2 hours later you're at a ball game together or you're having a family dinner. So it is hard, most people know, within a family business to try and separate the business from the family so that you can, that was frustrating, but hey, you want to go grab a beer? Do you want to go do this? Or, oh yeah, we're at your house tomorrow night. So
Right.
that was something my mother always did. Sunday family dinners, and you couldn't talk about business till 7 p.m. Sunday night, when they'd all go into the office type thing. So that's very important on any family business, is to find and to carve out that time that you don't bring the work into the family or know where that division is. But so those Saturday meetings, we gave up a lot of Saturdays, but look what it did for us. It was very productive. And it went right back to what Vern and Barb started in their early years of relying on consultants and other expertise to help with the planning.
Right.
You only know what you know. You need to bring it in. So bringing in Laverne and Nick to the fold of the Dan, the Brian, the Jeff, and the Kevin, who were all boots on the ground at all times. And Laverne and Nick came from a different direction. And I have to say that I also have 2 children who followed their spouses cross countries and who are not active in the family business, but they're still a very important part of the Sessler family dynamic and understand all the companies.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I want to take that because I've met your kids. And one of the things, being part of the Sessler family carries with it a level of responsibility and a level of pride that even though they're not working in the business, when we run a family meeting and you have them there, they want to know what's happening in the business, not because they want to change anything or do anything or have a say in it, but it's this pride that they have and that connection back to their aunts and uncle, their uncles and their mom and dad and their grandparents. And so, when you're part of a family business, even if you're not working in it, you still care. And I think that's
absolutely. And we have 4 grandsons. Boys are prominent within this family. And one grandson wants to own a Bobcat company so he can rent to Sessler Companies. The other one out in Omaha is going to start a new, Midwest division for demolition. And the other one wants to own the railroad so it can help supply us. So all these boys, and even though they're not active in the day-to-day, they understand it and they're a part of, and they're already thinking how they're going to be part of.
Amazing. I want to come back to the grandkids in a second, Jane, but there was something else in that 2015 piece, there's the business part that we were doing a lot of transition and communication work and, and scaling the business and figuring out where everybody was going to go. On top of that, though, there was some, when I, met you guys, Craig, Jane, and Vern, in order to be able to leave the business and pass the legacy, you needed to know that you were personally going to be okay. And that, there was a lot to that and correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember between the 3 of you, there was probably 5 or 6 different advisors that were at some level or another involved. And, for me, it was like being pulled in different directions. This one said this one said that. And it, by the time we had gone through and unraveled everything, there were some opportunities that came from the planning process. There was some gaps that were inside of there. And, and I'm talking about this because I think it's really important from a transition standpoint. Until those things were tied up and nice and neat, and you felt that there was the probability of success and probability of financial independence, even if you didn't own the company, you probably wouldn't have backed away. Do you want to comment on that at all?
You just want to rip off that Band-Aid, don't you?
No, not too bad.
Well, it was a difficult time. The company had taken a little bit of a downturn in 15 and 16, and then it quickly rebounded. But at that time, we're halfway through the transition. We're not sure where G3 is going to land, or where the direction of the companies are. Are we going to close down the wrecking and start a new sister company? So there were so many transitionals. And as you said, we have so many advisors. We have 3 different legal companies. We have yourself, we have the CPA firm, and then we also had a CPA consultant. So yes, by the time you put them all together and stuff, but 2015-16 was very pivotal because it could have gone an entirely different direction. And instead, everybody pulled up the bootstraps and worked to find the best path forward, and working with the different advisors and getting through the personalities and the expectations. And that was the difficult part, because G2 is our life, right? And we need to make sure that our lifestyles are going to continue, and that G3 understands, what our expectations are and what our needs are, the same as we need to understand theirs, right? So trying to make sure that, are the buy-sells in place? Are the officer life insurances in place? What do we need to do for transitions? How's it going to be? What are the tax impacts if we transfer or if we gift? What's the best estate situation? And then every year it seems there's a different politician that wants to play with the estate tax, so that jumbles up all of your planning. But I think we're in an excellent spot right now. But 15 and 16, 5-6 years ago, was the pivotal point for the Sessler Companies.
And one of the things, I want to just say thank you to the Sessler family myself, because when I entered working with the Sessler family, I would call myself a financial advisor, a wealth manager, even pretty high, high level, because we did the estate and the tax planning, and we did the business transition, but it was still that field. I think through the years for myself is where we've grown to an outsourced family office, where now we make sure that the trusts, are taken care of, and, the transition. And, you guys forced me to become a business coach. I mean, you didn't force me, but it was like, it just, I went out and got certified in a program so that, I could talk the language and just help, the family as much as possible. And Laverne III said to me once, Mike, there's a book that I just read called The One Thing. Don't you think, you do so much. Every time I say, we need help in here, and you say, oh, I can help with that. I need help over here, and you say, I can help with that. And so I sat down with Laverne a couple of months ago, and I showed him our business plan, and I showed him our process for serving a family. And I said, basically it was all about getting the family aligned, making sure, the focus on the family, focus on the finances, and focus on the future are the 3 phases that we've developed. a lot of it came from this relationship that I've had with you and several other clients, much like yourselves. And what I said to Laverne, I said, I do focus on the one thing. I focus on the family business. It just so happens there's a lot of stuff around there that somebody has to kind of pull all the spider webs together and be in the center of it so that you can talk between the contracts attorney and the tax attorney and the accountant and the 401k plan and the business, the business coach. So I really want to say thank you for the level of experience that you've taken our practice to through the years. And, we have moved from being financial advisors and wealth advisors to now it's this, outsourced family office that includes coaching the businesses. And that's, on that note, I've got two things left that I want to hit on before we get done. Brian, you and your siblings and cousins are starting to think about, the future. And, number one, from 2015 to today, we just finished 2021, the business has grown about 4 times. Is that about right? And then that's just looking at Sessler Companies, all of them. And I bet you, Jane, I didn't even think about this, but if you start taking all of the enterprises, it's probably closer to 5 times because you throw in all the development and some of the other things that you've been doing. That's pretty impressive in 5 years. Brian, what are you guys talking about? What's the future look like for the Sessler Companies? What do you guys envision over the next 20 years?
Well, so it's funny because we're in the middle of a bunch of talking and strategic planning and everything else, but the general gist of what my generation feels for the future is we don't need to be the biggest. Okay, we're not out there to be the biggest demolition company, the biggest environmental company. We just want to be the best, and in order to be the best, we know we need to hire the best employees that we can out there. And so we're strictly we focus so much on who we can hire, who's available and everything else, because that's the only way we're gonna do it. So our future, I applaud, my partners, my generation so much, because if you look across the mall, as I'm the oldest, I look down and there's not a single one of them that I could say is, a drag on the company or, is a downer on the company. Every single one of them brings, and it's really funny to look at, but everybody's got that unique ability to assist and thrust the company forward. And it varies so much between sales and engineering and, a mind for the finances. And there's just so many different areas that my partners, my generation excels at. And it's, it makes me smile when I think about it. And then when we couple that with the team that we've put in place, it's we have no choice but to go forward and be successful. It's just going to happen.
That's awesome. And Jane, in order to help them with their success, you talked about you've got 4 grandsons, and I happen to know a project that I had talked to you about, and then you just went with this. We call it the Grandparent-Grandchild Philanthropy Project. Talk about what you did with your grandsons a little bit around that, because I want to tie in, where I see, that can be really helpful to a family enterprise.
My husband and I started a philanthropy fund, like a foundation. And with those monies, I have 2 children, and they each have 2 children. So I had set up a program where I allocate $5,000 to each family, and that they're allowed to make recommendations for grants to these different organizations, and that the parents can, but the kids as well. So each of the kids are allowed to make a $250 donation to an organization of their choice. But in order to do it, they need to handwrite out their application, very simple. They need to either volunteer at that organization or attend a meeting. They also need to do a poster about why they want to support this organization. And then they present it at our family meeting, annual meeting. So when you have a 7-year-old that stands up and explains why he wants to support the YMCA to give sports equipment to kids that can't afford to play baseball, and they have the pictures, and it makes them understand and to care about their communities and to care about others. That we were all together over New Year's, and one of the 9-year-olds, because there's 2 7s and 2 9s, one of the 9-year-olds said, "Nana, can we start making our requests for this year? I've got my list all set. I know who I want," right? So the kids understand it and they get excited, and we develop a listing of all of the different organizations and what they do. And each family just 2 weeks ago went through and discussed what the impact they had, because some are in the Midwest, some are on the East Coast. So it's just about volunteering, community service, looking out for others, and to know about the legacy that you individually can leave.
Love it. Now watch this and tell me if you're seeing this. You've got 9 and 7. They had to communicate in front of the family. So now they have communication skills that they're building. They have critical thinking that they're doing at 9 and 7 to determine why I want to give to this organization. They have to be, do some volunteer work. So now they're stretching themselves to either be at a meeting or be in front of, people that are much older than them around this piece, and developing leadership, skills, because that's what's happening there. Brian, if I'm not mistaken, if you're looking to hire new employees, aren't you looking for somebody that can be critically, do their own critical thinking, has good communication skills and good leadership skills?
100%.
Do you understand where this is going? And Jane, I'll throw a project to you, a little curveball towards you. Somewhere between now and age 10, 11, get the 4 boys, even though they're in different parts of the country, to choose a charity together and make them work as a team.
Absolutely.
And so then you can start to build that team building piece alongside of that.
So Michael, not just within my family, but the extended Sessler family, we come together for a weekend in the summer. Mandatory Sessler family attendance, right? Fun time, another Saturday meeting, right? And we do make it fun. But one thing I incorporated this last year was for each of, my nieces and nephews and grandsons to develop a poster about all the things they did this past year. So whether it was skiing or ice skating or rollerblading or baseball or hockey or lacrosse or soccer, and then they stood up in front of the 60, 70 family members and they presented their poster and talked about what they did, right? So even though it wasn't about making financial donations, it was about gathering the information, presenting it, and then speaking in front of the group. And I think, Brian, you'll agree, they all did an excellent job. Even the youngest at 4 was
awesome.
there. Every single one had their poster with either glitter or whatever. But, and we'll do that again this summer. It's just to keep Generation 4 involved into the family and make sure they're coming up through as well.
Incredible. Nicely done. I know, and I think, we shared an email that said I could do this podcast with you guys for about 5 hours. We've gone overtime. I guess we'll wrap up with a couple of things, but one, we know there's going to be obstacles in your future, Brian. in G3 will experience obstacles. You know, what are some of the lessons that you've learned from G2 to make sure that, you know, you guys work to overcome those obstacles?
Yeah, I mean, integrity, you know, and lean on other people as Aunt Jane was mentioning, you know, we're going to come up with a lot of issues that we don't know the answer for. And fortunately we have a network of consultants that we can reach out to, and just, we got to rely on each other as partners to help get us through the obstacles that, not if they come, but when they come, because it seems like every week there's a new one.
Right, exactly, especially in these times. And then we'll wrap up with each of you. If you're talking to the transitioning generation, Jane, somebody that's getting ready to go to transition, what are your 2 or 3 words of wisdom for them? And Brian, for the rising generation who's getting ready to be, you know, part of the transition, what are your words of wisdom to them? So Brian, I'll let you go first, and then Jane, you can take us out.
I could really sum it up in 2 words, but be humble and be patient. You know, it takes time. It's going to be stressful. You know, everybody's head's going to be in a different place, you know, and it's going to be really good to have the open line of communication and be honest with yourself, and be honest with the other generation, so they can understand where your head's at, and hopefully they're honest with you so they know where they're at. And the one thing you got to keep in mind is if you're entering into a transition process, it just means that everybody has the same goal in mind. They want the family business to keep moving forward. So when you have that common goal, you know, you can figure out a way to get there. You'll see the path. Just stay humble and be patient.
Love it. Jane?
What I would say to G3 is that you are being given a torch, and that torch involves integrity, family pride, and also legacy. And that those 3 things you need to carry forward for multiple generations to make sure that the Sessler legacy that your grandparents started continues.
And what would you advise to somebody that's getting ready to transition the business to, you know, that's to the next generation? What advice would you give to another family business member that's getting ready to do it?
The same thing that Brian just said: be humble, be mindful, be open, right? Open dialogue is important, and expect pushback, because everybody has their own idea of how it should go. And don't be afraid to rely on your consultants to help you wrap it up and move it forward. Because, you know, Mike, you and your father before you have been instrumental in our family and our company's transition, and we thank you for that.
No problem. I want to say thank you to Sessler Companies and to Jane Shaffer and Brian Sessler. My name's Michael Columbus. I'm with Family Wealth and Legacy. You've been listening to the Family Biz Show, and we really enjoyed having you with us. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss the next episode of the Family Biz Show. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.